Have you ever wondered what life would be like if you were a bureaucratic inspector in a fantasy world? Perhaps you've pondered who it is that makes sure fairy tales play out by the book. Potentially, you've even inquired to yourself about if the characters in your favorite games get health insurance, or if they take smoke breaks while they're off screen.
I don't need health insurance anymore. I'm already dead, you know?
Or maybe you've asked none of these questions, but I know I certainly have. Hi, my name is Sam, and I'm the creative director, lead game designer, and lead writer working on the open world narrative game, The Bureau of Fantastical and Arcane Affairs. And I'm happy to be doing so alongside the rest of our extremely talented team over at Hip Flask Games. We started work on this project almost a year ago. It's been incredible and also terrifying and also really, really educational. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about our game development journey so far, some of the strategies we've been using, what's worked, what hasn't, and a little sneak peek about some of the systems and content going into the game. Now, you might be wondering, what the hell is this game? And if you like genre soup, I have a treat for you. The Bureau of Fantastical and Arcane Affairs is a first-person, exploration-driven, semi-open world narrative game where you play as a bureaucratic inspector as well as a hero in a fantasy world. And it's also a comedy, because I ran out of breath there. Oh, and it also has some visual novel elements. As the inspector, you get to dutifully set up all the blocks in the world, and as the hero, you get to knock them all down. The game features heavily branching dialogue, unique characters, full voice
The
acting.
necromancer makes a good show of rifling through his pockets.
Unfortunately, I seem to have misplaced those. I could have sworn they were around here somewhere. Do you know where I ordered duplicates?
Hand-drawn illustrations, mini-games like fishing, alternate endings, lots of consequence for choices, and more. But I'm not here to sell you a bridge, at least not entirely.
Some bridges for sale. I got some bridges for sale, so I'm selling bridges.
Though I wouldn't say no to a wish list. I'm here to tell you how we built the bridge, at least the first quarter to half of it. And as most stories go, I think it's best that we start at the beginning. Before entering game dev, I was a marketer at an underwear company, which, as much as I do love my underwear, I had some other projects rolling around in the old noggin. Skipping ahead a bit, after a 2-year sojourn experimenting with being a novelist, getting laid off from my job, and many rejected job applications, I eventually ended up exploring something that had always interested me: game dev. Only problem was I knew nothing about it, so I started reading all sorts of books about game and narrative design both, watching old talks from the Game Developers Conference, and learning generally what makes games, specifically narrative ones, work. I even paid for courses, including the narrative department taught by Susan O'Connor and another course led by Adrian Ropp. As this was happening, I stumbled across 2 YouTubers, Innie Austin and Jackson Field, both of which make videos about inspection agencies in video games. I thought to myself, that would make a cool video game. But surely that would be a massive undertaking, and I have never made a game before. But slowly the idea ate away at me, and so I said, okay, I'll make a portfolio piece, something small, nothing too big.
Foreshadowing as a narrative device.
But that portfolio piece went from a portfolio piece to a game jam, and then from a game jam to an indie game, and then from a smallish indie game to a rather large one. And now, here we are. Alright, so I had a game idea, but what was the game gonna play like? I knew from the start I wanted it to be a primarily narrative experience because that's my strength. That being said, I didn't want to do a pure visual novel. As much as I love storytelling, I also love exploration. I particularly love the discovery of side quests in Skyrim and Elder Scrolls games. I wanted to build a game where every nook and cranny of the world felt like it contained something interesting, something that really rewarded a curious player. And so I began to set up the bones. Unlike a normal linear game or even most open world games, the world would not have a main quest. Instead, it would be filled with small bite-sized experiences that would allow the player to decide what mattered to them. Narrative hooks for a proverbial player fish, if you allow a really weird metaphor. The other thing I decided really early on was the dual protagonist system. I really love games that emphasize depth over breadth. And so not only did I want to find a way to give satisfying choice and consequence, but I also wanted to find a way to make the world deeper, to make every level playable twice, but through a different lens. And so I decided that to see your choice's consequence as the inspector, you would have to play as the hero to fully understand them. So, for example, as the inspector, you might choose to let a ticket slide. Perhaps the necromancer is missing his evil-doing certification, and you decide it's just not worth the time. Well, that means, on the hero's side, that necromancer might not be very competent. And some decisions are more abstract. For instance, do you replace the missing princess at the top of the tower with a princess, or maybe something a little more interesting? The other side effect of this dynamic, which I think is really cool, is that characters will treat you differently based on whether you're playing the inspector or the hero. So when you're playing as the inspector, everybody treats you as like an agent from the IRS.
You bureaucratic. Fine, I'll unlock the door.
The door is now unlocked.
Whereas when you're playing as the hero, people treat you as an honored guest. I had the structure, so it was time for me to get promptly distracted. It was time to start thinking about the world's art style. I had a few things in mind when I started looking at this. The first thing is I wanted to avoid the old PlayStation retro gaming sort of pixelated style. While I do like it, I think it can be a little overdone. The second thing that I wanted is to find a style that had a lot of asset packs for it. I am many things, but a talented 3D artist is not one of them. And if you're unfamiliar, 3D modeling is one of the most time-intensive processes in game dev. And the third thing I wanted is for the game to feel cozy, comfortable, and maybe even a little nostalgic. I also wanted it to feel whimsical, like it was straight out of a fairy tale. At that time, I was playing a somewhat lesser-known game called Wayfinder, which, while it is fairly flawed in some ways, the art style is undeniably not one of those flaws. Just take a look at some of these environments. To me, that art style was the perfect mix of a sort of cozy, cartoony fantasy style, while still having a lot of whimsy to it. And it had plenty of different asset packs that fit the style. Ultimately, I actually ended up bringing on some really awesome 3D artists, and having these packs has given us an excellent base to build on top of. That being said, our 3D team is incredible, so I'm going to take this moment to showcase some of the awesome work they've done so far. One of our team members even put together a style guide for the sort of style we're going for, and that's linked in the description. So at this point, and this was before our 3D team even existed, I had a concept and a world. I was working alone, but it was becoming pretty clear that I was going to need help if this game was ever going to get finished. Besides that, I knew that I was going to need a lot of things, like sound design, music, 2D art, concepts, 3D art, which we already talked about, animation, QA, production, and I felt like we were going to need voice acting. Not to mention things like additional writers to help flesh out an absolutely massive script. So I got help. Over the course of the last year, using Discord servers and connections, I was somehow able to find over 60 devs who are just as crazy as I am and passionate about this idea, which is over 100 people if you include the voice actors that have joined too. It's actually incredibly humbling and insanely cool how many talented people are interested in this project. And I can confidently say that without them, it would be not even half of what it is today. Most of us are juniors who are trying to figure out the industry, but we also have some really, really experienced AAA veterans on this team as well. So let's get to talking about what they're working on. And let's start with 2D art. Now, one of the very few cuts to scope I made was to not include combat. Combat design is its own art, an art I know very little about. On top of that, I never really thought of combat as something that the game needed to have. I wanted it to feel more about stories and discovery anyways. But the hero still needed to fight. So what was the solution? Well, this is where the visual novel elements come in. I decided instead of having combat, instead of doing expensive animated sequences, we'd do hand-illustrated 2D cutscenes. And I'll let our 2D art lead take it from here.
As lead, I really wanted to do something very recognizable, and that would be a storybook. And this storybook style was chosen due to the whole narrative of the game. It really reminds me of a sweet, silly fantasy world right out of a book I would read as a kid. So I really instantly knew I wanted to mimic that. Sam really encouraged me to have the illustrations be reminiscent of my actual drawing style, which was an amazing opportunity, and I'm very grateful for it. And our phase 1 art making was focused on the intro, middle, and end cutscenes of the game. Unfortunately, though, we scrapped these full color pages and opted to make these illustrations the same style as our phase 2 art. Typical illustration process really goes in a 2-week sprint period. They'll give me their thumbnails, I give feedback, give me their tight sketch, I give feedback. They'll show me their final, I'll give any drawovers I have, then they'll hand me the PSD, and I'll make any adjustments and, any final touches and make the art game ready.
One of the other things we needed to figure out was our audio. Audio, like combat design, is its own art. And so I will not waste much of your time here, and I will pass it over to our audio lead, Eric.
So before we started to work on Bureau, we had decided to place a lot of importance on the vibes, also known as the ambience. So this is stuff like trees swaying in the wind, the birds above you, bushes rustling at your feet, the lake lapping at the shore, stuff like that. So this meant we put a lot of detail into not only designing those sounds, but also the way that we put it into the game. So we utilized a lot of different tricks and techniques when we put the sounds in to make sure that they never sound stale. They're always slightly different. And because of that, we've been able to build a really unique soundscape to explore. So our bread and butter, though, of what we've been working on is what we call our narrative sounds. It's a really broad category, but they're sounds that play while you're in dialogue with characters or you're in a cutscene. Our narrative team has done a phenomenal job putting this story together. So we put a lot of work into matching this detail in our sound design to make these moments really stand out. And I mean, these sounds have been so fun to work on. They have stuff like giant impacts, sword slashes, huge monster roars, and of course, some really cool magic sounds. Currently, our team has been focused more on finalizing some sounds for a mini-game, and also building the audio out to another quest for the demo. But that's it from us over here in the audio team. We're really excited to share what we've been working on, and hope you like this small look into our process.
Now let's talk a little bit about animation.
Hey there, I'm Elliot, the lead animator for the Bureau of Fantastical and Arcane Affairs. I'd like to give you a brief overview of our animation process for the game, starting with the control rig. All of our animations are made using Unreal Sequencer, which means we use Unreal Engine itself to make all of our animations. Setting up a control rig requires a lot of work, but once we have everything working, we have a character that's eager to move. Once we're ready to start making an animation, we can drag the control rig into the viewport, and, using the handy pose features, we can grab the first frame of the idle pose and use it to make sure all of our animations match up with the default idle animation. Then, we just start animating. Our animations go through multiple iterations. Our team is dedicated to making sure they look as good as possible. Once an animation is finished, we can bake it into an animation sequence and plug it into our dialogue system to see the character come to life.
The one thing Elliot didn't mention here that I really wanted to touch on is our animation team has done a really good job of finding animations that reflect the characters. I think something that makes our animation in this game unique is that typically all these characters would only have combat animations because they're monsters. But it's really fun to see them have these subtle sort of talking animations that you wouldn't see in normal games. One of the things people comment on most when I show them the game is that it's fully voice acted, because that's something a lot of indies don't necessarily do.
It's a healthy pile of complaints, fines and warnings from the nearby Homeowners Association.
I am very quickly learning why. Not because I don't love our voice actors, I think we have a lot of talent here. Mostly because trying to organize voice actors for over 200 characters can be a little challenging. So here's a little sneak peek on how we've been handling it. Our casting and voiceover producer, Lindsay, has been teaming up with voice directors Alan and Ted to guide our cast towards the best performances possible. Our very first casting call had over 400 responses, and we are now wrapping up our third round of casting as the game has grown to over 200 characters. Here's how it goes. Once our casting team makes our choices, we onboard the voice actors and determine the best order to record each quest in our lineup. Lindsay then formats the scripts. The narrative team is very cleverly designed. Thank you, Lindsay. She wrote this script. And our voice actors do character test reads of a few lines at a time until we're sure we have the right voice for that character. Then the actors can go off and record all their lines with the help of either Alan or Ted, whoever is directing their quest. Once the best takes of each line are chosen, they then go to Aiden or Akush or Jet, our talented dialogue editors, who clean up the audio, add any needed voice modulation, and prep the files to be implemented. Our total lines recorded or actively in progress so far is 5,414. We have around about 50 voice actors right now, but are soon adding a lot more. Alright, this is Editor Sam, so if I sound a little bit different, that's why. Initially, I wasn't even going to include this section, partially because it's so tied to other elements of the game. But let's talk a little bit about narrative. Narrative is inherently kind of hard to talk about, because I don't want to spoil the game for you. But most of the game is built around the narrative. All your inspections, everything happens through dialogue trees. And those dialogue trees usually lead to branching outcomes that lead to additional branching outcomes on the hero side, which ostensibly means for any quest, there's anywhere from 2 to 6 outcomes that you might be able to find. And that's just per quest. One of the goals was to make this game feel very replayable, in addition to creating real player agency. This incurs a ton of writing. What you're looking at right now is just a section of our script. We write in flowcharts because it's a lot easier to track our branching outcomes via that versus a traditional screenplay. This is all to say that the game is a little bit less like Papers, Please, and a little bit more like a bureaucratic Baldur's Gate, even though that's a huge stretch in terms of scope. To sort of lessen the scope and still have this amount of choice, what we've done is we've sort of encapsulated each quest. So as I mentioned earlier, instead of having one big linear story, it's more like a bunch of bite-sized side quests. That being said, we do have some really big quests that span the whole game that I'm not going to give away. You just have to be able to look for them. Another thing we added recently is alternate endings. So there is not just one way to end your Inspector playthrough and start as the hero, or to end your hero playthrough, but many, many different ways. This was mostly inspired by the Stanley Parable Closet ending. In many ways, I like to think of this game's narrative as more of a sandbox. We've put a lot of fun toys in there, but really it's up for you to discover and latch on to what you like most. The game's writing is heavily inspired by DreamWorks movies like Shrek, as well as games like Fable. At first, I was the only writer on this project, and I probably put together about 60 to 70% of the script, but recently we brought on a bunch of other writers and editors who not only are adding their own writing to the game, but improving the stuff I wrote before. So here's the whole narrative team on screen. As an indie project, the other thing our writing does is cover up basically our quote-unquote budget gaps, even though we have no budget. One big example is adding a narrator. Having a narrator allows us to describe things that we might not necessarily be able to animate. This can be elaborate battle sequences, or it can be something really simple. The funny thing about game dev is that it's easy to launch a rocket into space, but it's hard to have a character take off their hat and jacket and sit down at a table. And I have to say, our narrator voice actor, John, is incredible. So that was just a small bit about narrative. Alright, now let's get a little into music here.
Hi there, I'm Achilles, and I'm the composer for the Bureau of Fantastical and Arcane Affairs. Our vision with the music in the game is to really try and capture the essence of storybooks, fairy tales, and everything the game plays off of. Something with plenty of whimsy and wonder, but also intrigue and heroism. We wanted to create a score that's atmospheric and a part of the world when it needs to be, but also one that's alive and a part of your journey as you make choices and determine how the story pans out. It's also been interesting to create two separate musical identities that fit within this greater vision, one for each half of the game. Obviously, the Inspector and the hero are very different people with different goals, and the music will reflect that. Since they'll be traveling through the same areas and meeting many of the same characters, you'll hear some shared motifs and melodies across both halves of the game, but with different contextualizations depending on who you're playing as. I think some of the tougher tracks I've worked on for the game have got to be those representing the Bureau itself. Nailing the vibe of an organization that's equal parts mundane OSHA bureaucracy and shadowy secret agency while keeping it in line with our overall musical aesthetic is definitely a challenge. Right now, I'm finishing up parts of some of the battle music you'll hear when playing as the hero. Depending on who you might be fighting and how the battle goes, you might hear something different musically, so keep an ear out for that. It's really been such a pleasure to contribute my work to this game. We have a talented, dedicated team, and we're working hard to get a demo ready for y'all to play. So please stay tuned and look forward to the demo release.
But of course, without the code that actually pulls the whole game together, there would be nothing. So let's talk a little bit about programming.
Hi, I'm Kelsey, and I'm the programming lead for the Bureau of Fantastical and Arcane Affairs. While the main focus of this game is our narrative, we wanted to have some activities for you to do outside of the story. One of these activities is fishing. This is a classic minigame in all types of genres, so we wanted to bring it to BFAA as well. Our fishing minigame focuses on QTEs and precision with some button mashing. We do have a setting though to turn off button mashing if you're not a fan of that. In addition to fish, we have some really cool items you can fish up that one of our 3D modelers has been working on. Here's a sneak peek of a few. So far, only myself and programming and a little bit of design have gotten into this minigame, but I can't wait for you to see the finished product.
I think Kelsey is being a little modest here. The programming team has done a ton of work. From a lot of micro fixes with our narrative systems, to slight movement tweaks, to fully implementing our menu and UI systems, to NPC patrols, and a lot more, including the minigame we are showing here. One of the things that I feel like often gets left out of these devlogs is implementation. The implementation team for us is not only just implementation, but also almost pseudo-narrative design. They add the quests to the game as well as the VO and make sure they feel seamless to play through. They also ensure that all the variables that quests are using are working and ensure that the right things and levels are loaded in depending on which character you're playing. Production is another one of those things that sometimes can fall to the background, but our producers keep everything on track across all teams and make sure, or at least try to make sure, we're hitting our deadlines. This is made doubly difficult as most of the team is working on this just part-time in their spare time. Their work is a little bit more difficult to describe, but they're putting together tracking charts, tables, Gantt charts, etc. They also track how fast the team is moving. Speaking of things that should get more attention, let's talk a little bit about QA. And this next part is written by our wonderful QA lead, Michelle. So, how do we approach quality assurance? By not playing the game. It sounds a little silly, doesn't it? After all, QA sounds like a dream job. You are paid to play games. Yeah, not so fast. You don't get to be the hero of the story. Your job is to crash into every single object while trying to glitch through it. Run through the same dialogue a dozen times while jumping, crouching, walking away, pausing, changing resolution. It's throwing yourself at every rock to see if you fall through. And that's just the beginning. Once you discover an unfortunate NPC T-posing or an area you can fall through, you have to figure out why that happened. QA is the art of playing a game in a way no player ever will. It isn't enough to know that something breaks. You have to verify how and when it happens. So, for example, even though our game doesn't have combat, let's say the boss crashes when you kill him. Is it because of the weapon? Can you do it with any weapon? Does it only happen when they're in the middle of a specific line? Did it happen because you were jumping, crouching? What if you heal as the enemy dies? What if you die as you land the final hit? Then, if you're able to figure it out, you have to go decide if you want to yell at the programmers to go fix it. Or you can label it as polish, which typically means that it'll never get fixed. Then when the game comes out, you'll see someone stumble upon a bug that you had already flagged, and they'll ask, did anyone even test this game? So, yeah, QA is pretty fun. Finally, let's talk a little bit about UX design. And I'm going to be paraphrasing here a little bit for our UX designer, Rodrigo. So the first thing you have to figure out with UX, as is everything else, is what the game's about and what its universe is like. From this, you map out what is typically called a user flow, which will give the general structure of systems such as quest management, menus, minigames, etc. From there, this develops information architecture, which ensures that every action makes sense both functionally and narratively. Once Rodrigo had his structure in place, he started with low-fidelity wireframes, which are created to test hierarchy and navigation. Eventually, these become interactive prototypes that validate usability and accessibility across different screens and contexts. This allows for iteration, which is an important part of all of game development, not just UX. One of the main things we wanted to accomplish in our UX was designing a mostly diegetic system where the interface exists naturally within the world. Menus, notes, case files, they all appear as physical objects that the player interacts with, which hopefully reinforces information and storytelling. One very famous example of this is Black Ops and how they did their initial menu structure. And if you like that, I have a feeling you're going to like a lot of the things that we're putting together. But that's a lot of work, so to support this complexity, we're building a scalable design system. So we document every component in visual style, that way it's easier to replicate the style later on. And yeah, that's a little bit about the UX. And I think that covers it. This was a long one, and I think it was very overdue as I've been working on this game for over 18 months. While the rest of the team has been here for almost a year in some cases. If you watched the end, I just want to say thank you, and if this game sounds like something you might be interested in, please go ahead and wishlist it on Steam. It's really no secret that the gaming industry, is not doing super great right now, and this studio has almost been entirely comprised of juniors shut out of the industry, and I think that together we're making something really special. So we are glad to have you along for the ride, and I cannot wait to share more. As a special treat for watching till the end of the video, I present to you some of our narrator John's bloopers.
Eventually, you arrive at the mountain. You're the hero. You could... Shush. Oi. You're the hero. You could have been trying to find your place in the script. Oh, bugger. You stand back in front of the bastard board. The quest board is lucky to have you on the case. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a spotted bollocks. I can't remember where I am.